While the media obsesses over tweets and palace intrigues, something monumental is happening in American foreign policy that they refuse to cover. Tonight, we're going to bring you explosive revelations from inside the State Department that will reshape your understanding of global politics. Secretary Rubio has pulled back the curtain on developments so significant they could alter the course of multiple international conflicts. What do Putin's representatives say behind closed doors that shocked even veteran diplomats? And why are certain Middle Eastern leaders suddenly panicking? And what radical restructuring is happening to agencies that have operated unchecked for decades? The geopolitical earthquake you won't hear about anywhere else starts now. And as Secretary Rubio works to navigate global conflicts and build a foreign policy that puts America first, many of us are still dealing with unpredictable spring temperature swings at home. Just like Trump's targeted approach to solving international crises, this portable heater I'm holding right here delivers precision warmth exactly where you need it without wasting energy heating your entire house. Perfect for those diplomatic early mornings or late nights monitoring global developments. This compact device warms any room in minutes. It's built with the same efficiency and focus that Trump demands from his foreign policy team. Save 60% off at SaveWarmNow.com while supporting American energy independence. You'll find it linked down below. So let's jump into what happened with Marco Rubio exposing foreign gangs invading our cities, the deep state cover-up of directed energy weapons, plus Trump's master plan for world peace. Let's dive deep. Pure evil exposed. Hamas kidnapped and murdered innocent infants while their demonic supporters cheer in the streets. This is not government. It's a death cult that must be examined. The bodies of a mother and her babies prove what we've been saying all along. Marco Rubio.
Infant children.
As we sit down today, Hamas has released bodies of 4 Israeli hostages, said to include a mother and 2 children. Your thoughts?
I think it's a reminder of who Hamas really is. I mean, just think about the fact they went in, they grabbed this family, this young woman, her 2 infant children. I think one was only 4 years old, the other one was 1. And then, and it's not just that they did it and that they died in their captivity. Who does that? I mean, who kidnaps families? And then the way even that they were released, you know, with people cheering in the streets, it just tells you who we're dealing with Hamas. This is not a government. This is not simply an ideological movement. These are evil, terrible people. And the idea that they would ever be allowed to continue to have arms, to be militarized and to control territory anywhere in the world is unfathomable. So our hearts break for these families. You can't be happy that remains are returned, but that's very important to these families. From a religious standpoint, it's a sacred thing. But I think to everybody else, it's a reminder as well of who we're talking about here when we talk about Hamas.
One of the Israeli government's objectives is the destruction of Hamas. You see some of these pictures, they suggest some strength. What does the intelligence tell us?
Well, I would never discuss intelligence, but I can tell you Hamas is weaker than they once were. They clearly have enough people to put on these shows. They clearly have enough people to still be a threat at some level, but they can't be allowed to reconstitute. Hamas cannot be allowed to once again be a group that can do 3 things: terrorize the people of Gaza, attack Israel, and actually be a government or anything like a government anywhere in the world. They just can't.
As we sit down.
Yeah, tell that to the protesters in the street. Yes, he confirmed Hamas is weaker but still dangerous. That they cannot be allowed to control territory or their forces. The fake news won't show you the celebration
of 4 Israeli hostages.
He revealed new details about the U.S.-Russia talks, direct engagement with Ukraine, the U.S. proposal for Gaza, plus Iran, China, and the emerging role of independent media.
As we sit down today, Hamas has released the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages, said to include a mother and 2 children. Your thoughts?
I think it's a reminder of who Hamas really is. I mean, just think about the fact they went in, they grabbed this family, this young woman, her 2 infant children. I think one was only 4 years old, the other one was 1. And then, and it's not just that they did it and that they died in their captivity. Who does that? I mean, who kidnaps family?
And a COVID truth bomb. Even State Department now admits that the accident in Wuhan was from the Chinese labs playing with engineered viruses funded by Western money.
So I think, in my view, based on everything I have seen, that the likeliest situation here was that the Chinese were messing around with the virus. Somebody caught it in a lab, and they took this novel virus and spread it through China and then spread it to the world. And it was devastating. And there needs to be accountability for that.
I was just going to say, there really has been no accountability for the CCP.
The accountability begins by proving it. And it's hard to do, right? Because the Chinese are not necessarily going to open their books. Look, if that had happened in the United States, If that had happened in some other country in the world, that country would have probably been forthcoming and said, we had a problem, guys, we were messing around with this stuff and look what happened. They would have shared that information and we could have worked very quickly, much faster than we were able to figure out how to counteract it. And they didn't. Instead, what they did is clam up and refuse to share information with the world, and then this thing spread and just ravaged the global economy. Just think about how many people died, how many businesses went out, how much money we had to spend in this country just to keep Main Street open when we had the shutdowns, how divisive it became. Some of that could have been prevented if they had been forthcoming. But instead, like most authoritarian regimes, they clammed up and they held that information back.
And some people believe that it was intentionally released. Weapon cover-up confirmed diplomats with brain damage, like they were hit with baseball bats. This is no mass hysteria. The deep state has been hiding the truth about directed energy weapons targeting Americans. Now the State Department admitting the attacks were real.
Hysteria.
Have directed energy weapons been used against U.S. government personnel?
Oh, I do not believe in the conclusions that we've seen in the past, and I think evidence in time will prove me correct, that these things happened by accident, that these things were a result of mass hysteria or some pre-existing conditions. Now, in some cases, maybe, but I have no doubt in my mind that something caused people to be suffering from these things in different posts around the world, not just limited to Havana. There's a lot of work still going on. I think we're going to learn a lot more about it over the next few years as more work goes into it. But I've met some of these people. I've interacted with them for years. And I can't explain every case, but I think there are most definitely cases where there is no logical explanation other than the fact that some external mechanism caused them to suffer brain injuries that in many cases look like they were hit over the head with a baseball bat or assaulted somewhere. We can't ignore that. And in the meantime, what we have to ensure is that whether they were State Department personnel or working for some other agency, that those people are getting the treatment and the support that they need. And it's a top commitment of mine to make sure these are people we sent abroad to serve our country. They were harmed in the service of our country, and they deserve our ongoing support, not being accused of things like mass hysteria or, they're just...
It's government gaslighting.
Well, I think it's outrageous. And I don't know what the intent was behind that, but ultimately, this State Department is going to be transparent with them. Anything we know, they will know. And in the meantime, we are going to assume the worst, and we're going to treat them as if they were victims. No matter what, we're going to treat them as they were people that were harmed by serving our country overseas.
Now, if you don't know what he's talking about Havana syndrome. Multiple cases several years back where members of the government were working in Cuba and they suddenly fell ill after some kind of now they're calling it a directed energy attack from some kind of foreign entity. And they've never been the same since. Massive cover-up ever since then, and now it's finally coming to light. Deadly Venezuelan prison gangs invading America. Tren de Aragua, terrorized South America, is here. We were warning it forever, and now here's Secretary Rubio discussing it more.
Just naming them and...
How often are you in the Oval at the White House for the big decisions?
Well, I don't know about how often. I'm there pretty often. Just came from there right before I met with you here now. We're working on, even as we're working through all these reforms in the department, we're also out there trying to realign American foreign policy, whether it's my trip to the Western Hemisphere. Just naming them and understanding that they're a problem. Tren de Aragua, TDA, is a group I follow. That was a prison gang in Venezuela. The Venezuelan regime sort of pushed them out of the country. They terrorized Peru, they terrorized Ecuador, they terrorized all kinds of countries, and they worked their way up the migration path into the United States. And I've been warning about them now for a year and a half. I think I might have been the first member of Congress, maybe of the U.S. government, to actually identify them by name. And so I think those designations are important, and it gives us a valuable tool to cut off any partnerships they may have, not just with U.S. nationals, but any other businesses or individuals around the world that are assisting them in what they're doing. And it's not just the gang, it's the drug trafficking organizations that operate out of Mexico, too.
Does the Foreign Terrorist Organization, does the FTO designation, does that move the U.S. government a step closer to using military force against the cartels?
Well, it depends where they're located. Obviously, in the case of Mexico, the preference always is to work in conjunction with our partners in Mexico. And we can provide them a lot of information about who they are and where they're located. If in the end these people pose an imminent threat to the United States or cross into our borders and into the United States, then it gives us tools to go after them using law enforcement, using DHS, using ICE, using the FBI, the DEA, and whatever agencies we have available. Well, there was no ground. I mean, it was all off. We had no... There are three things that people have to understand. The first is, even at the height of the Cold War, even in the worst days of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union had communication. And the reason why, if you want to be mature and grown-ups about it, I'm not a fan of most of what Vladimir Putin has done, and that's largely irrelevant when it comes to statecraft, because we ultimately have to be able to talk to a nation that has, in some cases, the largest tactical nuclear weapon stockpile in the world, and the second largest, if not the largest, strategic nuclear weapon stockpile in the world. So you have to have, I mean, at the end, whether we like it or not, Russia is a power, a global power, and they're involved and engaged in Syria. They've been involved and engaged in the Middle East, even in the Western Hemisphere, certainly in Europe. We have to have some communication with them. So step one is our embassy in Moscow is barely functioning. I mean, it literally barely operates because it's been denied access to the banking system. That has to be fixed. But if we close our mission in Russia, we have to close their mission here. And then we really have no communication with them, whether it's a detained American or some other item.
Nuclear confrontation looms while our Moscow embassy barely functions. Even during the Cold War, as you heard, we maintained communication with the Soviets. Peace is an action, not a noun. Trump is the only leader who can end the Ukraine war while globalists push for endless conflict.
And so really, as much as anything else, this meeting was, are you interested in even talking about ending the war? If you are, then let's create a process where we can begin to engage at a technical level. And that process will now, at some point, be set up and begin. The demands they make for ending the war are maximalist and unrealistic, then I think we have our answer. If, on the other hand, there's any opportunity to pursue peace, we have to do it. And I think people have, I really am sort of puzzled, generally, in diplomacy, people who are seeking to end the killing and the harming of thousands and thousands of people in war are usually celebrated for an effort to end the war. If it was just the Vatican who was involved in these talks, who would criticize it? For the President of the United States to be engaged in finding whether there's the possibility of peace should be celebrated, not condemned. And so really...
Zalinsky rejected Trump's help after begging for billions.
Whether they're serious about peace or not, we're just not at that stage yet.
When President Trump posts that President Zalinsky is a dictator without elections, what are you thinking?
I think President Trump is very upset at President Zalinsky, and in some cases, and rightfully so. Look, number one, Joe Biden had frustrations with Zalinsky. People shouldn't forget it. There are newspaper articles out there about how he cursed at him in a phone call because Zalinsky, instead of saying thank you for all your help, is immediately out there messaging what we're not doing or what he's not getting. I think the second thing is, frankly, I was personally very upset because we had a conversation with President Zalinsky, the vice president and I, the three of us. And we discussed this issue about the mineral rights. And we explained to them, look, we want to be in a joint venture with you, not because we're trying to steal from your country, but because we think that's actually a security guarantee. If we're your partner in an important economic endeavor, we get to get paid back some of the money the taxpayers have given, close to $200 billion. And it also, now we have a vested interest in the security of Ukraine. And he said, sure, we want to do this deal. It makes all the sense in the world. The only thing is I need to run it through my legislative process. They have to approve it. I read 2 days later that Zalinsky's out there saying, I rejected the deal. I told him, no way, that we're not doing that. Well, that's not what happened in that meeting. So you start to get upset by somebody. We're trying to help these guys. One of the points that the president made in his messaging is not that we don't care about Ukraine, but Ukraine is on another continent. You know, it doesn't directly impact the daily lives of Americans. We care about it because it has implications for our allies and ultimately for the world. There should be some level of gratitude here about this. And when you don't see it and you see him out there accusing the president of living in a world of disinformation, that's very counterproductive. And I don't need to explain to you or anybody else, President Trump's not the kind of person that's going to sit there and take that. He's very transparent. He's going to tell you exactly how he feels. And he sent a message that he's not going to get gamed here. He's willing to work on peace because he cares about Ukraine. And he hopes Zalinsky will be a partner in that, and not someone who's out there putting this sort of counter messaging to try to, hustle us in that regard. That's not going to be productive here.
What's the timeline for a meeting between President Trump and President Putin?
Well, that topic came up in our conversation with the Russians, and what I said, I know that now they're saying that they said it, but we actually said it, and that is, well, there isn't going to be a meeting until we know what the meeting's going to be about. I mean,
do you expect it later in 2025?
I don't know the timing of it, but a meeting between President Putin and President Trump has to a meeting about something. We have to know what that meeting is about, what's going to be achieved at it. You don't generally have these meetings until you know some outcome or some progress has been made. So I think when that meeting happens will largely depend on whether we can make any progress on ending the war in Ukraine. And if we can, and that meeting is what seals the deal, I think everybody should celebrate that President Trump is a peacemaker.
Only Trump can stop the nuclear Iran. The European globalists failed miserably. Iran is behind every terrorist group in the Middle East. Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, all funded by Iranian regime. Trump's maximum pressure is the only solution to crush their terror network. Here's more from Rubio.
On its third year, the only global leader.
Why do you say he's the only one?
Well, because others have tried and have failed. There was an effort in Istanbul a couple years ago, and it involved a number of European countries, and it failed. It didn't lead to a result. No, this war is now going on its third year. What global leader now could engage in this and actually even bring Putin to the table? Maybe we're not successful either, but right now we're the only ones that, through President Trump, that have any chance. Maybe the chance is 1%. I don't know. Maybe the chance is 90%. But he's the only one that can even test that proposition. And everyone should recognize that and celebrate the fact that he's willing to do that early in his presidency. He's willing to do it. No one else is willing to do it, and no one else right now apparently can.
You were also in Israel in recent days, and when you were in Israel, you said there will be no nuclear Iran. How far is the Trump administration willing to go to stop a nuclear Iran?
Well, ultimately, I think President Trump has been clear. We're not going to discuss tactics or measures. He's issued an executive order to once again return to the maximum pressure, primarily because we've seen that Iran uses the Iranian regime. Let me be clear. I'm not talking about the Iranian people, the regime. They use any money that they make to fund their weapons programs, to fund their sponsorship of terrorism. If you look at all of the destabilizing things that are happening in the Middle East, the Houthis and their attack on global shipping, Hamas, Hezbollah, the militias in Iraq that attack both Israel and the U.S. presence there, the anti-ISIS presence that we have, all of them are sponsored by money from Iran. They're behind all of this. And so why would we allow them to make any more money that they can use to sponsor these things? Now, how we prevent a nuclear Iran, I'm not going to discuss the options that are available to us or anyone else for that matter, but I want to be abundantly clear. The Iranian regime can never be a regime that's behind all of this. The only global...
USAID exposed as the global slush fund operating like a shell game. This is not a global charity. It's your tax dollars being funneled to globalist pet projects. Here's more.
It's the truth. And we have more work to do.
Do you have any regrets about the shuttering of USAID?
No, it's not regret. Look, I wish we'd had more cooperation. I know people at USAID don't like to hear that, but it's the truth. And I'm going to go back to my time in Congress. Okay, I've had two problems with AID going back to my time in Congress. I'm not against foreign aid. I've supported foreign aid. We're going to do foreign aid. No one here is saying we're going to have
So
a
some
zero.
programs will survive.
Absolutely, and some already have. You know, we've issued waivers for PEPFAR as an example, and others. That's not the question. As a member of Congress, when you wanted to ask, well, who is operating this program? Because sometimes it goes from a program and then they give it to a third person. That third person
sounds like a shell game.
But that's the only way we're going to get to the bottom of this. We have to answer this is American taxpayer money. The idea that USAID is some sort of global charity that's out there, serving the interest of the global community. No, it's called the USAID. In the United States, it's our taxpayer money. That should also be aligned with the national interest. Look, that's just part of the stuff that happens in Washington, and the columnists and people write stuff. I didn't even know that story was out there. I'm just focused on doing my job. I feel pretty busy, and I know we're pretty busy. We have more work to do.
And the deep state meltdown continues. Trump freezing the corrupt USAID programs.
Contractors are.
Sounds like a shell game.
It can be, and so that's what we're trying to get them uncooperative. In some cases, we're even trying to push payments through the system to get operation in that regard. And so the result was, and this was before I became acting, but even after, some of those people that became uncooperative, in some cases, were even trying to push payments through the system to get around the freeze. That we have to address. And so I think it's unfortunate because the ideal way would have been, but this to go through it the way I've just described. But this is an agency, frankly, at least in some levels, that has been largely uncooperative and completely unaligned with the State Department. We have embassies where USAID and the embassy work very well together. And we have embassies where the embassy is working on one mission and USAID is working on a completely different mission that's in contradiction with what the State Department's directive is in that nation. That has to be fixed. So ideally, we would have fixed it in a way that would have been, different. But when you run into passive-aggressive, and in some cases, aggressive opposition to your work,
wow,
that requires you to now go in and put a stop to everything. And so that's the process we've had to follow, unfortunately. But that's the only way we're going to get to the bottom of this.
Sounds like a shell game.
Wow, that's crazy. USAID working in complete opposition to the embassies around the world. Tax dollars funding programs with zero oversight, but Trump has issued waivers.
It's important.
A month ago, you hit pause on most of the foreign aid. Is that review nearing completion?
Well, part of that review is issuing waivers. So I think we've issued over 250 waivers. And that means someone comes forward and says, this program is really important. It's important, it can be justified, it's aligned with the national interest. We issue a waiver for it. I'll give you real world examples. We were in Guatemala and we came across a program where we are helping train Guatemalans to identify the precursors of fentanyl and intercept it, to help us extradite drug dealers that we're trying to get a hold of. And we issued a waiver for that program because that's clearly aligned, right? What is our national interest? We want to prevent fentanyl from reaching the streets, and we want to take the people responsible for trafficking in it, and if they're wanted, bring them to the United States to stand trial and serve prison sentences. We also issued a blanket waiver for emergency humanitarian support, food, medicine, housing, things where there's a crisis somewhere in the world. And but that's an ongoing process, and I think before the 90-day period is up, we'll have a real good insight into all the foreign aid we do. I know it's been disruptive for some programs, but I think in the long term it's going to be beneficial because we'll be able to say that every program that we are out there operating serves the national interest because it makes us stronger or more prosperous or safer. That's the process we're trying to go through, and we go through it on a daily basis.
Massive restructuring going on at the State Department to fight human trafficking and mass migration. The biggest threat to every Western nation. The globalists created the crisis, and Trump is fixing it.
Our hope is, and that's how we're trying to align, even as we have to do our job on a daily basis, is what our hope is to align and give the State Department clear missions from the field, meaning our embassies and people out across the world, all the way to the 7th floor where I work.
What are your directions for the first 100 days?
Well, I think we really view it as more than a 100-day project. But as we've gone in and done it, one of the things we're looking for on restructuring is our bureaus. You know, we have our policy bureaus, they're geographically based, and then we also have our functional bureaus. And that human rights, and for example, there's a bureau for trafficking, human trafficking, there's a bureau for migration. I think those issues are interrelated. So one of the things we're working through, we haven't made a decision yet, is whether that bureau should be consolidated into a bureau and what's our national interest that prevents migration and prevents trafficking, not facilitates migration and mass migration, which is not just a challenge to the United States, by the way. It's one of the leading issues in Europe. We just came back from the Munich Security Conference. Every country in Europe is facing the challenge of mass migration, but it's really putting strain on virtually every country in the world is facing migration challenges, every developed country in the world. So that's just an example of the kinds of realignments that we're looking to make, and we want to do it in a thoughtful and careful way, but also in an expeditious way. We can't move too slowly either, because then it just won't happen. And
so Rubio's revelations show us a president who understands something fundamental. Peace isn't passive. It must be actively pursued, but from a position of strength and not weakness. With Hamas, Trump's approach is unflinching. As Rubio put it, this is not a government. These are evil, terrible people. There will be no appeasement of terrorists. With Ukraine, Trump is the only global leader capable of bringing Putin to the table while demanding accountability from Zalinsky after $200 billion in American aid. With Iran, the massive pressure campaign has returned, striking at the heart of their terror network. And at home, USAID and the State Department are being realigned to actually serve American interests, not globalist agenda. So, here's a question for you. Is this new foreign policy direction the America First approach Trump has promised all along, or is this the beginning of a realignment that will reshape global politics for decades to come? Drop a comment and represent the Next News Network by grabbing a hat or a t-shirt at shop.nextnewsnetwork.com. You'll find it linked in the description below.